And this black boy came down there pushing a tricycle, the foot on the back and holding the handles and pushing with the other foot. And he came up to us and he wanted to know what were we doing down there. I said, we came to get some water and we just got to playing down here. He said, well, if you don't get away from here and if you come back, I will kill you. That was the evening before.
A 14-year-old boy put to death for a double murder in 1944. The youngest inmate put to death in modern U.S. history.
Youngest inmate put to death in modern U.S. history.
Yes, News 10 awareness.
Got what he deserved, and he was put to death.
He said, why would they want to kill me for something I didn't do?
Why would they want to kill me for something I didn't do?
We lived right back close to Green Hill Baptist Church. We lived back there right close to it. And Ruth's sister, Violet Freeman, went home with me from school. And after we got through eating, we went down to the church to get some water because we had an open well. And Mama didn't like for us to drink that water. So we went down to the church to get some water to take back to the house. And we got to playing down there under an oak tree. And this black boy came down there pushing a tricycle, the foot on the back and holding the handles and pushing with the other foot. And he came up to us and he wanted to know what were we doing down there. I said, we came to get some water and we just got to playing down here. He said, well, if you don't get away from here and if you come back, I will kill you. That was the evening before the little Vinegar girl and Tim's girl went missing the next day.
And when you found out those girls went missing and you got charged with a crime, what was your reaction?
I got real upset because I said that could have been my friend and I. And we knew those girls. We went to school together.
What do you remember about them?
Just that they were very sweet girls. That happened in 44. March. I was 8 in May. And I can't say that he killed them, but I firmly believe that he did because of the way he threatened us and the way he looked at us.
And did you know why he would make that kind of threat? And then did y'all say anything back to him when he did that? Or what did y'all do?
No, we got our water and went to the house because Mama could stand in the back door of our house and see us down there at the church when we'd go to get water. And she would watch out for us. And the next evening that those little girls went missing, Mama had the baby, which was my youngest brother. And she started down there to the church because she saw those little girls down there talking with the little black boy. So she started down there after she knew that he had threatened us. But somebody came up in the yard. So she turned around and went back to the house. And she always regretted that she didn't go on down there because she said maybe she could have kept those little girls from going to hunt wildflowers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. Let me begin by saying, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a tragic situation, and I certainly am sympathetic to the defense's case. No one here can justify a 14-year-old child being charged, tried, convicted, and executed in some 80 days. That a witness who discovered the victim's body sat on the coroner's inquest and the grand jury possibly, and that the trial lasted only one day. The lawyer didn't ask any questions on cross-examination, which is stipulated to by the state. They called no witnesses, and they offered little or no defense in this case. And also poignantly filed no appeal. In essence, not much was done for this child when his life laid in the balance. But I want everyone to understand that we're not here today to establish the guilt or innocence of George Stinney in this case. He may very well have committed this crime. It is to determine whether or not he received a fair trial. Ladies and gentlemen, our legislature and courts, in their wisdom and evolving sense of decency, has provided safeguards to make sure this would never happen again. And I want everyone to be confident in the justice system as we see it today. We have come so far as a society, and in South Carolina in particular. So I really hope that at this hearing, we focus on the good that we can do in furtherance of our duty of ensuring that justice is served in this courtroom and all courtrooms throughout the country. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and hear an opening statement briefly, if we could, from defense counsel. This is your motion. And then Solicitor Stinny, I'd like to hear from you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce the defense team, Ray Chandler, who's seated to my left, Matt Burgess to his left, and Miller Shealy seated to his left. Your Honor, as you quite pointedly pointed out to everybody here, this is a situation where we have a juvenile, and he was 14 years old at the time that he was executed by the state of South Carolina. Everybody recognized he was the youngest person to have been executed in the state of South Carolina in the 20th and I guess the 21st century, because we don't execute juveniles anymore, and the law has advanced to that point where we don't even consider that a 14-year-old could be executed in this country. So you have very well pointed out the issues, and I won't belabor you on that. But what I would like to do is to read to you a couple of things that we discovered in the state archives that were written to then Governor Olin Johnson. And Olin Johnson was asked after George Stinney Jr. was convicted of this crime. Apparently, as you know, 1944 was a watershed year for this country. I mean, that was D-Day, the year of D-Day. We were in the midst of World War II. So this case was probably not getting a whole lot of press based on what was going on in Europe, based on what was going on in the Far East with Japan. And the United States had to, and I'm sure that most of the newspaper focus was on that, but we found hundreds of letters, and all the letters were not favorable to George Stinney Jr., but most of them were. And one of the letters was written by H.L. Bailey, he was in the U.S. Army stationed in Europe. And I'm quoting from him, and he said, "I'm a white Southern boy. I've been in the Army long enough to know what the Negro boys are losing their lives for this country. And I surely think they should have the same treatment as the whites are getting."
I've been in the Army long enough to know what the Negro boys are losing their lives for this country. And I surely think they should have the same treatment as the whites are getting.
He wrote, okay? If not, what in the world are we fighting for?
If not, what in the world are we fighting for?
It's always been one-sided. The only thing you've ever seen is that picture, that poor pitiful picture of him in that prison garb. Poor pitiful little black boy railroaded by the white people. You know, and they're trying to make it race, and it wasn't.
Going back to, you were talking about this Mr. Pratt man. Can you talk about his experience of working in that case?
Yeah, and he told me when he went up to that elderly black gentleman, and he said, who could have been mean enough to have done this? And he said, the man automatically said, George Stinney. And that's when he went down to the Stinney house, and he said that he heard them discussing it outside the open window. And that the relative, which I believe now was his stepbrother, half-brother, Johnny. He questioned both of them. They took them in, and he said, we put one upstairs and one downstairs, and he said they were not together. We questioned them both. George Stinney confessed and told us exactly what happened. The stepbrother said that he gave them the same story that George told them because George had already told him what he had done. And he said, can you show me the murder weapon? And he said, yes. He said, he led me to, and it wasn't a creek or a pond or a ditch, it was sort of like a low end of the field near where the bodies were found, and he walked out and reached down twice, and on the second time he reached down, he pulled up the iron spike and gave it to him. And he told me, he looked me dead in my eye, and he said, don't ever believe that boy didn't kill your aunt, because from the time I became involved, that whole chain of events, there was not one link broken. It all fell right into place.
And what do you think of some of these people who are now trying to bring this case back to light? Said he was, this little boy was made to admit to a crime he did commit by...
He had ample time to tell the truth if he were coerced, because we have talked to people. There's a paper, an article in one of the older newspapers where Sheriff Gamble gave him plenty of time, and Mr. Pratt was with him at the penitentiary, and we'll give you a copy of that. And it says, George, do you know why you're here? And he says, yes. And I'll show you. And he said, did you commit this crime? And he said, yes, sir. He said, did anybody make you say anything that you didn't want to say? And he said, no, sir. And he said, well, you know you're about to die. And he said, yes, sir. And he said, he told him, goodbye, George. And he said, goodbye, Sheriff. So he had ample time there. We've talked to a man that got in touch with us from Columbia, Mr. Jim Kelly, and I forgot to call him yesterday. He called and talked to Carolyn first. He was interviewed. He saw the interview, I guess, of you on the Columbia station, and he called and told us that he was the son of the chaplain. His daddy was the chaplain at the time George was at the state penitentiary. And he said that there was a black chaplain and himself, and they both counseled with George. And he said, my daddy said that he was 100% sure that George murdered those children. And he said that my dad, he also said that he had gotten one black boy off of death row because he believed in his innocence. And he said it was not racial, that he certainly, his dad said that he was convinced that he had done it. So, it's not that we believe hearsay of what we grew up with all these years. We've done our research. We've talked to people that know that we're actually there. The people that read these articles in the newspaper don't know the whole truth. They don't know what we've discovered and what we grew up with. My grandparents and my mom and my aunts and uncle, they never talked about it. We didn't talk about it on a daily basis. But it was just something that happened in our family. And I believe that he did it completely, 100% sure that he did it.
I believe that he did it completely, 100% sure that he did it.
No evidence, no eyewitnesses, and a confession with no documentation.
No evidence, no eyewitnesses, and a confession with no documentation.
Still, the 95-pound George, too small for the electric chair, was put to death. Today, Kenneth Gaines, a professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, joins us now with a legal analysis of the Stinney execution case. Thank you for joining us, Professor Gaines.
Yes, thank you.
Now, is this case about exoneration? Is it about proving George Stinney's innocence?
I don't believe that's the way to really couch the issue. I think the real issue is whether or not he got a fair trial, whether or not there were mistakes made, and whether or not if the judge, after hearing all the evidence that has been discovered since the trial, makes the decision as to whether or not George Stinney should have a new trial. And if the judge does make that finding, the question then is whether or not the state will have enough evidence to go forward again with the trial or have a new trial. And at least most of the legal experts think that the state would not have enough evidence, and probably the case would be either dismissed by the solicitor or by the judge.
Now, what would be a reason to reopen the case? Would it be because there's evidence now that did not exist in 1944?
Well, that's what the defense attorneys that are representing George Stinney are arguing. They're arguing that they've discovered evidence since the trial that would make a difference in the result of the trial.
It's a new trial. And so would you, or is that what you're asking for?
Whatever it takes to show that he was innocent.
And let's go back, and so you are convinced that he's innocent?
I'm sure of it.
Okay, let's go back to, and tell the court what you remember and how you remember those events as they happened back in 1944. Do you remember, for example, the day before George was arrested?
It's just like any other normal day. You don't think about anything that will happen.
Before you start there, Captain, let me ask you, how do you remember those events? Why are they so vivid in your mind?
It's very outstanding. It's something shocking I was expecting.
Okay. Is it every day your brother gets arrested?
No.
Okay. And so tell us about Alkaloo back in that time frame. What kind of community was it?
My father took us to movies. He took us to see shows, circus, all kinds of things that young people would do. And he was always there for us, and he took us to all these to give us those experiences.
Okay. And how about tell me about Alkaloo itself? Where'd your dad work?
My father worked at a sawmill.
Okay.
And we belonged to a Baptist church. We all attend school there in Alkaloo.
So you attended school at the church?
No, in Alkaloo schools.
Alkaloo schools.
Yeah.
And then you went to church also. Did you go to Green Hill Baptist?
Green Hill Baptist Church.
Okay, and that's located in Alkaloo?
Alkaloo.
Okay. And so, and you remember all of those things, is that correct?
Very good memories.
Okay. And you remember the day before George was arrested? Can you tell us what you remember about that day?
It was just like any other normal day. You go about doing your daily chores, and the next day, everything just went haywire.
Okay. All right. Now, do you recall what George's chores were?
Well, George did several things, but one was taking care of the cow, taking the cow out to graze.
Right. And what was your cow's name?
Lizzie.
Lizzie. You remember?
I think it was Lizzie.
Huh?
I think it was Lizzie.
Okay, Lizzie. Okay, and so that was one of George's duties?
That was one of his chores.
Okay. I say chores. Okay.
Chores.
And so one of his chores was to do that.
To take that.
I know you said your father took you to movies. He did things with you guys.
Yes.
I'm assuming he worked hard.
He worked at the sawmill.
And did your mother work also?
My mother was a cook at the elementary school.
Okay.
She cooked there for a while.
Okay. So whenever your parents weren't there, who did the babysitting for your parents whenever y'all were out of school?
Well, my mother was always there.
Okay.
We didn't have a babysitter.
All right. So tell me about the day that George and tell me about Amy and George's relationship. Your sister Amy.
They were tight. Wherever George went, she was right with him, like a shadow. She always went with him. Whatever he did, she just wanted to be with him, you know.
And so what's the difference in George's age and your age and Amy's age?
About 3 years each between George and me and Amy and myself.
Okay. And so, do you recall, I think this would have been a Friday, March 23rd, is the day that the Vinegar and the Thames girl went missing. Do you recall that day?
Well, just like any other day, you know, we saw some girls in the community riding their bicycles, and they asked if we knew where they could find some maypops.
Did they ask you that, or is that something that you...
No, we were just in the yard because it was gated. You know, it had a fence around it. We saw the girls riding, and they were looking for maypops.
Well, explain to the court, you said George's job was to graze the cow.
Right.
And Amy was a shadow.
Right.
And I guess you were in the yard, and you saw these girls that day?
I saw the girls riding on their bicycles, or pushing the bicycles.
Okay. But do you know who the girls were?
No, I had never seen them before.
Have you ever met the vinegar child?
Never saw the girls before that day. No, never saw the girls before that day.
The purpose of this presentation, and is really this is really an aspect of the wider PhD research that I'm doing, which hopefully I'll have time to talk about later on. The title is "The Good Side of the South? Race, Class and Politics in the South Carolina of Olin D. Johnston." So it's probably appropriate that I start by answering who was Olin D. Johnston and why am I talking about him today. Olin D. Johnston was a politician from South Carolina during the era of the New Deal, the Second World War, and the Civil Rights era. And there are three reasons why I'm talking about him in this presentation. The first is that on the one hand, Olin Johnston's life and career would fit very, very neatly into what I would call the South Carolina political tradition. But it does have rather a unique space within it, which I will explain. Second, his career draws together the massive Southern resistance movement to civil rights with the politics of the US Senate in a way which not a great deal of scholarship does at the moment. There is a great deal of political science scholarship on the US Senate and a great deal of historical scholarship on the civil rights movement. I'd like to bring the two things together. And finally, my decision a few months ago to put this presentation together coincided neatly with a very rare mention of Olin D. Johnston. In The Guardian and The Telegraph, Johnston was remembered as the heartless governor of South Carolina who refused in 1944 to pardon the black teenager George Stinney, the youngest person ever executed in the United States.
Remembered as the heartless governor of South Carolina who refused in 1944 to pardon the black teenager George Stinney, the youngest person ever executed.
Betty June came to our home that afternoon after school to find my sister. She wanted my sister to go with her to find flowers so she could take them to her teacher. And my sister Violet had gone home with somebody on the bus that afternoon and hadn't come home, so she left. And then the next thing I heard about it was that night there was a knock on the door, and the men were gathering to go out and look for them because they hadn't gone home. And then the next morning they found them. The men searched until way over in the night and then came home, and the next morning they went out again, and they weren't out too long before they found them. And then the next thing I remember about it was going to church that Sunday night. This was on a Friday, and on Sunday night we went to church, and after church we walked around to the houses because at that time they brought the bodies back home, and went to the Benica home and went to the Timms home. And I remember seeing the little girls in the caskets, and their faces were black and blue where they'd been beaten in the face.
And when you saw that, like, I mean, you probably can't even imagine, because nothing like that happens.
No, we'd never seen anything like that before. But I saw them in the casket, and their faces were just bruised terribly.
How old were you at the time?
I was had just turned 13.
Do you remember anything about Betty June, like just from your?
I remember seeing her at school and at church. She was a little ball of fire, I think, and she was a lot of fun. And she always had a good time. And I had seen the Stinny boy out at church with his cow. And he would bring the cow down there in the afternoons for the cow to eat the green grass there on the railroad tracks. And I was afraid of him.
And I was afraid of him.
Because I don't know why, but I was afraid of him. We'd go down there to get water if we were out at the Robinson's house.
Because I don't know why, but I was afraid of him.
We were out at the Robinson's house, and we'd go down to the church and get water. And I was afraid of him. I don't know whether they threatened me or what, but I don't remember that. But I just know I was afraid of him. If I saw him, I would turn around and go back to the Robinson house. I wouldn't go near him.
Probably because he threatened your sister.
I can't remember that, but I remember my sister talked about it. She died in 2008. And she, every now and then, she would bring it up and say he threatened, shortly before he killed these little girls, he threatened to kill me. And she said if I had been at home and had gone with Betty June, he...
Did anybody else ever say anything about the Stinney kids, or George in particular, or...
Well, the Professor Hamilton, in one of those newspaper articles talked about Boy he was and how hard he was to handle. And we had heard they sent him down here from New York because they couldn't handle him in New York. Now, I don't know whether that was true or not.
Yeah, because I didn't know if they were moved down here and then moved back, because I was trying to figure out
I don't know.
New Jersey after
I don't know.
So, like, what do you remember about, do you remember anything about, like, the search or people talking about it at the time? Like,
Oh, yeah, and everybody, even the black people said, knew that he killed the children. There was never any doubt about who killed them. We had black people that worked in the house, and Daddy worked black people at the mill, and they all knew that he killed them. There was never any doubt about it. Nobody's name was mentioned. The first time I ever heard that somebody else was suspected of killing them was about 5 or 6 years ago.
and did they say why they suspected him?
No, it just said that was a rumor, and that's about what happened.
What do you make of it, like 70 years later, that now they're trying to get the ruling overturned?
I think it's for publicity for that movie, and I think it's financial. I think they're doing it for money.
And, you know, a lot of people say, you know, this little boy didn't get a fair trial. He was 14. He was electrocuted. What do you say to those who say?
That's the way things were done back then. I'm sorry that they electrocuted him. I wish they had just sent him to prison. But that's the way things were done back then, and we didn't have any control over it. That's the way the judicial system went. That's the way they handled things back then. And they couldn't leave him out. They had to take him out of town, or he would have been lynched.
What do you remember about Alkaloo? Like, just that, you know, y'all said there.
We had a real good school and a real good church, and everybody knew everybody, and we weren't afraid of anybody.
Everybody knew everybody, and we weren't afraid of anybody.
At that time, we weren't afraid of people. We slept with our doors even the screen doors were not latched.
Even the screen doors were not latched.
And I saw where there was this one interview with Mr. George Firestone, where he talked about the railroad track.
The railroad track, he's mistaken because Robert and I lived across the railroad track. The main street ran beside the railroad track, but there were streets. Hotel Street went across the track and went out into the country, and then the street I lived on is now called Spagna Road, and it crossed the railroad track and went on out into the country, and there were houses on that street, and there were houses on Hotel Street, and there was no such thing as the track separated the blacks from the white. That's fiction.
And now all this time later, it's like this case is kind of gotten brought up again. What do you want to see happen?
I don't think they know what happened, and they won't listen if you tell them. I can remember a lot of it, and there's several of us that are old enough to remember where the railroad track was and that kind of thing, and they have it confused.
And what do you say? Like, there are some people who say, well, you know, he was a little boy, didn't know what he's doing. He didn't know that he was confessing to the crime. He was given ice cream by, you know, the deputies and whatnot. What do you think of all that?
I don't know. All I know is what I read.
These are letters, hundreds, asking for George Stinney's sentence to be commuted. These were letters that would have been sent to Olin Johnston, who was governor of South Carolina at the time, would have had the ability to commute the sentence if he had chosen to do so. And it's letters from a wide variety of people. Clergymen from all over the state, a prominent preservationist, Susan Pringle Frost from Charleston, submitted one of the letters. Veterans, men who are serving overseas, all of whom are asking for the death sentence to be commuted. It says, "Dear sir, I, as a Southern soldier, am writing you this card for the sake of justice, equality, and true democracy, something I believe has been forgotten in the case of the electrocution of a young colored boy, 14 years of age, scheduled for Friday morning. We, the people of South Carolina, think his sentence should be death. Underlined, he is not too young to die. If he could kill those young, helpless children in cold-blooded murder like he did, his intentions, we want no Negro to try to make love to a white girl. We say give him death. If he can take another's life, we can take his. We appreciate your action in this matter, and we believe we can count on you for justice. Thanks very much." Very sincerely yours, just a 16-year-old girl from South Carolina, name omitted, from Lexington, South Carolina.
Now, from the research that I've done, I know that there were, I believe, 4 people who were executed in 1944. Would you say it was typical or atypical for the governor to receive that many letters on one case?
Oh, that's definitely atypical. That's far more letters than you would have seen from a commutation file.
And would you say a majority of them lean one way or the other?
I think the majority of them are asking that the sentence be commuted, that the death sentence be commuted, and if possible, that George Stinney would serve his term.
And the sentiment in most of them, was it because of Stinney's age that they were asking?
That's correct. I mean, but most of them think that the execution of a 14-year-old is outside the bounds of what should be accepted in a civilized society.
Regardless of whether they think he was guilty or not guilty, it was more so the age for them.
Absolutely, and most of the letters leave that question of guilt or innocence to the side and bring up the aspect of his age as being the reason that the sentence should be commuted. These are some of the petitions that were signed.
Stinney's speedy conviction by an all-white jury for the rape and murder of 2 white girls is still contested 70 years later in 2014, and Johnston's refusal to exercise his right to pardon is frequently attributed to the cynical opportunism of racist Southern politicians who refuse to intervene on behalf of persecuted African Americans in order to maintain white supremacist credentials. Now, to be clear, my aim in this paper is not to defend or to apologize for Johnston's actions, far from it in fact, but rather to put the story of George Stinney in the wider context of Olin Johnston's journey through the murky history of race, class and politics in South Carolina. So first, I want to start by contextualizing Olin D. Johnston within the South Carolina tradition.
Is it unusual for white girls to be in that area?
They were just children riding. I didn't think about whether they were white or what. If I just saw the white girls riding, that's it, pushing the bicycles.
Okay. Do you know whether or not they stopped and spoke to Amy and George?
They might have, because my sister Amy and George were maybe at the railroad sitting down while the cow was grazing. And so the cow would graze there for a while, and then they would bring the cow back.
And did, at some point in time, did the girls leave?
I don't remember they left there and went on about their business.
Okay. Tell us about what you remember George and Amy doing after that.
George sent Amy ahead to turn the water on.
Right, tell us about how the water happened and all that.
Yeah, it's a spigot in the yard with a big tub that you turn the water on and fill it up. So he would always send her ahead, and she would run and turn the water on. By the time he got there with the cow, the water was about half full in the tub.
So we grazed the cow, then we watered the cow,
and put the cow in the shed.
And so put the cow up
for the night. Right.
Okay. Now, do you recall a period of time that you were gone that day that George was babysitting Amy? Do you recall that?
No, if they were there, I was in the house.
Okay. So you were in the house, and tell the court where the house was in relation to where the cows grazed.
Oh, that was a distance across the tracks, not too far from the house.
So if you're standing there in that witness chair, would it be, and just using this as an approximation, because I know it's been a long time ago, is it fair to say toward the end of the courtroom? Or is it further?
A little further than that.
Okay. Would it be twice the size to the other side of the court?
Yeah, because the railroad track ran between there, so that's where they would sit and watch the cow graze and then bring the cow home.
Could you see George and Amy from your house?
If I went looking for them, I would have to go to the front because I was usually in the house doing something.
Okay. So you do recall seeing the girls, but you never saw. Is there any point in time that you didn't? That George left the home that you understand that day?
No.
Okay. Now, do you remember or recall the next day, which would have been the 24th, and I think this would have been the day they found the 2 girls' bodies? Do you remember that day?
I don't remember that day.
Okay. And can you tell us why you don't remember that day?
trying to think. See, the girls went up past our house to wherever they were going, and George came back. I don't remember nothing about the girls the next day because it was business as usual for us.
Right, but do you remember that the girls were missing and a search party was looking for them?
No.
You don't remember that at all?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Do you remember that when the next day when your brother George was taken into custody?
Okay.
Do you remember that day?
Yes.
Okay. Tell the court what you remember about that day. First of all, were you home when he was taken into custody?
I was not home.
Okay.
My mother's not home. My father's not home. Just Amy, George, Charles, and myself.
Okay. And so where were you at whenever George was taken into custody?
I was at the beauty parlor. Charles took me to the beauty parlor.
Okay. So
that was his job.
Okay. All right. So you weren't there when he was taken into custody. But let me ask you this question. When George came in the day before that, though, did you notice anything unusual about George?
Just George.
Okay. I mean,
nothing different.
If he would have come in and he had, for example, bloody clothes on, would you have remembered that?
I would remember that.
Okay. Did you recall back in those days how many sets of clothes George would have had?
I guess a change in clothes. You know, you don't have to watch a set and wear a set.
Okay. So, would you have, or somebody in the family, would you think somebody would have noticed that George had bloody clothes on, that would have occurred?
Someone would have noticed.
All right. Tell us how big your house was.
It was 3 rooms, like a 3-room flat.
Okay.
A living room, bedroom, kitchen.
Okay.
Beds in both 2 rooms.
And so you had 3 rooms, and did the kids sleep in a room together?
The kids slept in the middle room.
Okay.
And my parents slept in the front of the house, the front room.
How many kids were in the house at that time, do you remember?
4 of us.
In 1944, George Stinney Jr. was just 14 when a rush to judgment sent him to his death in South Carolina's electric chair. Convicted in the murders of 2 little white girls, Stinney's trial reportedly took just 3 hours. The all-white jury deliberated just 10 minutes. Now, 7 decades later, attorneys for the Stinney family asked for a new trial to clear his name.
George Stinney could not have committed these murders. I think George Stinney saw those children, but I don't think George Stinney was the last person to see those children.
The bodies of 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch in the small town of Alcaloo. A coroner's report at the time described a brutal beating. Multiple severe head injuries suggested the killer used a blunt instrument about the size of a hammer. Family of the victim still believes Stinney was guilty.
They had no choice in how they died, and he did, and I think that justice was served according to the laws.
In the few records that still exist, Stinney allegedly confessed, even told police where to find the murder weapon. During the trial, his attorney called no witnesses, asked no questions, and filed no appeal after the young boy was sentenced to death.
How did I know?
Today, Stinney's siblings testify the teen was innocent, with them the entire time.
And I want to clear the air. We are not allowed to go any place without my mother's permission. They were very strict with us. We could not go no place, nowhere.
And listening to the family on the stand today, they draw a picture of a case in which critical evidence seemed to be completely overlooked in this rush to judgment. They pointed out, in a crime like this, there would have been a great deal of blood, and yet they found no blood anywhere on their brother's clothing.
There would have been a great deal of blood, and yet they found no blood anywhere on their brother's clothing.
What do you remember about this case?
I remember Dad coming in from work and telling us that these 2 girls were missing this particular afternoon, and he, with a lot of the other people in the community, of course, went out to look for them. And I'm going to tell you what he told me and what I remember about it. They told the people in the search that if they were found, they would blow the whistle at the mill, so everybody would know that he'd been found and to come in. And at 1 minute till 7 the next morning, the mill whistle went off. A long, long blast, indicating that the girls had been found. Dad told us, and he had no reason to lie to us, that this black lady had told Mr. Alderman, Ben Alderman, that her grandson, who was staying with her, had told her what he did. And so it was our understanding that Mr. Alderman, along with the other authorities, went to his house, picked him up, and they had him in the back seat of the car, according to my dad, covered him with the coat where nobody would know he was even in the car. He carried them back to the location where the little girls were found and showed them where they were. The bicycle was in the ditch with them. Basically, that's all I know. That's all I was told. There was no real. There was a lot of sadness in the community, but I saw no uprising or running people out of town, or that may have been the case, but I didn't know it, and I was 13 years old, and I feel like I would have known it, seen it, felt it if it was there, but it really wasn't.
When you learned that a kid was arrested for the murders, like, what was your reaction?
I can only tell you I was saddened. I was saddened more for the little girls than I was for the kid that was guilty, because if he did it, he got what he deserved. Sometimes I think in today's way of handling those cases is cruel and unusual, to be honest.
If the attorneys in South Carolina are successful in wiping this from the record, does that give you any type of solace or closure, or is there any feeling that you have that this may actually happen?
Well, it would be good if it can, but like I say, he already paid for his life, and nothing would, even if they take it off, it would still not bring him back. And most of the people who were there who know, about a problem passed on now, it could help Virginia to come on to concerning not being guilty, but those who were there were still deceased and maybe died believing alive.
Did your father say anything or share anything with you about what he felt about this entire situation at the time?
No, he didn't discuss too much about it. I guess he just hurt to him, but I'm trying to be a man. I guess he hold a lot of things, but he really didn't discuss it with me. He might discuss it with the daughters, but to me, he really didn't say too much about it.
And your mother?
My mother didn't too. Only thing when I could put him to death, she just tell me, just don't worry, because my brother won't be coming back, and wouldn't come back if he could.
Half couplers like to have today on the railroad. They were coupled with link pins and drift pins, or links and drift pins. That's how the old log cars were coupled together. And this drift pin that Dad said that he admitted using, in fact showed it to them, was a instrument, a piece of iron, and I would say it was about that big around, and about 12, 14 inches in length, that had a head on it. They just dropped it through a knuckle on the end of the car to tie them together. And they say he got it off of a log car that was stored in that yard back there in the vicinity where the girls were found, as a matter of fact.
And what were people saying around the neighborhood? Like, did they say why he admitted to doing this or anything like that?
They indicated that as I remember it, that he attempted to rape the older girl, and he beat the little girl first, and then attempted to rape the older girl. Now that was the talk. I don't know what the authorities ever proved or disproved. Well, I did, and it was. They figured that was the reasoning. He wanted to rape the little girls, and they say he killed a young one first. But now I don't know. Who knows why they say that? But that was the common talk of the town.
And now race has obviously been brought into this, and they're saying that
at this time there's race brought into it, but it was no race mentioned. To my knowledge, at that time, it was not a racial issue. It was just mean, just a heinous crime. The fact that he's 14, it's sad that he wasn't raised any better than that. But what else? Who else would he have killed if he had that type mentality at 14? If he'd let him live till he's 21? All I can tell you is many other people may have been hurt in the meantime. I think he got just exactly what he deserved. He just didn't get it soon enough. That's my personal opinion.
What do you want to see happen with this case now that it's been brought up all these years later?
It's all for money. As I see it, the family, I don't think legally could gain financially from this crime if he's not exonerated. If he's exonerated from the crime, then the family is wide open to get money from the movie and for this book and probably sue the state and the county as well. I don't know the legal ramifications, but I feel like it's all for the dollar.
Question, David, why did it take 70 years for this case to go back to court?
This was a very slow-moving thing, but it continued to build over the decades. At first, the family was afraid to speak out. They actually had to leave their home. The siblings were talking on the stand today about how they had to leave in fear that a mob might show up to do them all harm after their brother was arrested. So they left in fear and didn't talk about it for a while. But they continued to keep the conversation going, and it took decades for them to find people to listen, to be curious, and to actually start doing research on this. They actually came up with some potential witnesses to bolster their case, including one man who was the cellmate of their brother, who said the young man at the time said that he did not do this and that he was forced into a confession.
This is a case that stirs up emotions of a time in this nation many would rather forget. A time when African Americans were not given equal rights, oppressed, and often wrongly accused. Long before the civil rights movement began, a black teenage boy in Alcaloo, convicted of murder and the deaths of 2 white girls, was sent to the electric chair to pay for his crimes. George Stinney was the youngest to ever be put to death in the last 100 years in this nation. There is a renewed fight to reopen the case going on right at the time of this taping. But the families of the victims say George was guilty, and there is no need to dig up the past. On March 24th, 1944, in Alcaloo, 2 young girls were murdered, 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames and 14-year-old Betty June Binnicker. The next day, 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. was taken into custody.
I was always told that George Stinney killed her and the other little girl. And that's never changed.
Betty June Binnicker's nieces say the only injustice is that they never got to know their aunt.
I believe he got what he deserved, and he was put to death. He was old enough to know better.
A medical report claims the girls were bludgeoned to death, their bodies left in a ditch. Officers at the time claim Stinney confessed, but there's no written record of it. The trial lasted about 3 hours. According to reports, Stinney's defense presented no witnesses, no physical evidence, and did not file an appeal. It took a jury of 12 white men 10 minutes to decide Stinney's fate. Just 3 months passed from the murders to Stinney's execution by electric chair.
They had no choice in how they died, and he did, and I think that justice was served according to the laws in 1944 when this happened.
Attorneys for Stinney's side think differently.
I believe that George Stinney could not have committed these murders. I think George Stinney saw those children, but I don't think George Stinney was the last person to see those children.
Ray Chandler says he does not know who is responsible, but says the justice system failed Stinney. Chandler says there is new evidence, including a statement from Stinney's cellmate.
He said, Johnny, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. He said, why would they want to kill me for something I didn't do?
Relatives and friends of Betty June Binnicker believe Stinney callously killed the girls and say his character, coupled with his confession, leave no doubt in their minds. One woman says Stinney threatened her one day before the murders.
He said, well, if you don't get away from here and if you come back, I'll kill you. And the next evening is when those little girls went missing.
Hundreds of people wrote letters to then Governor Olin Johnston, most asking for a stay of execution, with others calling for the punishment.
I don't think somebody that was found guilty of a murder like he committed should be exonerated for any reason. And with him being gone as long as he's been gone, I think it's foolishness.
Right now, a judge in Sumter is listening to testimony on whether George Stinney got a fair trial in 1944. On day 1 of the hearing, one of George's sisters recounted the day she says 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames came by with their bikes. Catherine Stinney Robinson, now in her late 70s, was about 9 years old at the time. She says she is sure her brother did not commit the crimes for which he was executed.
Welcome back. Opera Grand Rapids is premiering a new performance this weekend called Stinny, an American Execution. It kicked off last night with a sold-out show, and it'll pick back up again tonight. News 8's Gabrielle Pfeiffer joins us now with the details on the production. Good morning, Gabrielle.
Good morning, Brittany. This is the first ever professional opera premiere in West Michigan, and it's more than just about the amazing voices that you'll hear, but the story these performers will tell as they shine a light on racial injustice. George
20th century. In 1944, an all-white jury found him guilty of raping and murdering 2 white girls in South Carolina. He was just 14 when he was sentenced to death. 70 years later, in 2014, Stinny was exonerated after a judge ruled that he didn't receive a fair trial. Now, this production has sparked widespread conversation across town. Just yesterday, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist joined the federal and GR bar associations to reinforce the importance of their work. There will be 20 opera singers, 5 children, and 11 orchestra players featured in this weekend's performance.
It's really good art. It is a story about rape and murder and trauma told artistically well. In a community that's this conservative, the productions like this don't happen very often.
But for now, George's sister still replays in her mind the lines she read that George wrote to the family while he was in prison before his execution.
All he said in the letters, this thing that they're accusing me of, I am not guilty. That's it.
What is this thing they're accusing me of? I am not guilty.